The Madman! Welcome to a very special segment. It's a deck recipe review where I review all 18 of the new deck recipes. I rated them using a preference revealer, very sophisticated matching system where it matched up one specific deck against another deck, and I repeatedly pulled the program. I think this deck is better than that deck, I think this deck is better than that deck, so I think I've come up with a very accurate tier list of the deck recipes. And this is important because it puts into perspective, do I think I'm going to be able to hit Legend with a WHIZBANG deck? And it's going to be really close. I've kind of grouped it into decks that I think I can climb at above rank 5, decks that I think will be about 50-50 at rank 5 plus, and then decks that I think I'm going to lose ranks with at ranks 5 and above. I think I'll be able to make it to rank 5 at the very least. So let's start with the bottom of the pile. These are decks that I rank tier 3, decks that will lose more often than they win if you randomly roll them with WHIZBANG. I've already theory crafted of a warrior mech deck, and this one is not good. It has a lot of really weak cards in them, such as Skaterbot, Bronze Gatekeeper, Security Rover, Beryllium Nullifier. The only hope for this deck is you get to Dr. Boom Mad Genius and it hard carries you, and then you play a Mega Assembly on 10, and then you get some really good cards. There's no removal in the deck other than Execute, so if you get behind, you're pretty much never coming back, and you will be behind in this deck. There's no way you can aggressively punish any amount of combo decks or control decks. If you get Dr. Boom in your opening hand, keep it, is all I'm going to say.
Here we go.
Substantially better than number 18. Number 18 is just so far below number 17. Number 17 is Rogue DEATHRATTLE. The goal of this deck is to play on curve and to be able to use Necrium Blade, the power card of this deck, to activate a bunch of your DEATHRATTLEs. Necrium Vial can trigger something twice. You're hoping to hit Devilsaur Egg and Mechanical Whelp with your DEATHRATTLE activations. A value deck, but it's pretty slow going. Should lose to pretty much all of the archetypes of control, aggro, and combo, but to a lesser extent than the Mech Warrior.
My greetings.
Next up at number 16 is the DEATHRATTLE Druid deck. This deck is aiming to recruit 4-cost Astral Tiger repeatedly over and over again with the Guild Recruiter and the Grizzled Guardian. And then you're trying to use your Gloop Sprayer to get value by copying your big value cards of Carnivorous Cube and Grizzled Guardian and the Lich King. Kind of a reasonable idea. It's just not nearly unfair enough for the meta. At least it has an Ultimate Infestation in it and a Lich King. Try to play Umbra on Cube, the Grizzled Guardian or the Lich King. You could get a decent amount of value with that. Wins the Fatigue game if it gets that late because it has 2 Astral Tigers. But it's really slow.
The pleasure is mine.
This one is just a general value deck, and value decks are in a bad place in the expected next meta because value decks lose to combo decks. Value decks' goal is to try to stem the tide against aggro decks and then outvalue them, but control decks are going to beat this, combo decks are definitely going to beat this. Aggro is pretty much the only thing you can really beat, but it's going to be pretty tough to stabilize against aggro. So this deck simply tries to steal your opponent's stuff, and then use Spectral Cutlass to stabilize, and then play Test Greymane for a really big flashy effect. Pretty weak overall though. Gonna be tough to pull out the wins with this one.
Greetings, friend.
This is a tier 3 deck, which is, I expect to lose ranks with it, but I actually expect to be able to beat a certain archetype with it. This is the first of the decks that I think can beat archetypes, and that would be against aggro decks. This does have some very good anti-aggro tools with Doomsayer, Omega Mind with your Lightning Storms and your Volcanoes, and your Hexes. It's kind of like a Shutterwalk deck, except it doesn't run Shutterwalk, so that's why this deck can't actually beat the control decks. It's gonna be too slow because this itself is a control deck. You're trying to win in the late game with the Elise pack and the Lich King and the Hagatha Valley. Against aggro decks, against value decks, you can win. Other control decks probably have better control value tools at the end, and a control deck naturally loses to a combo deck.
My magic will prevail.
This is almost to the even matchup area, and I think this is a bit of a surprise because my chat initially exclaimed that this is one of the worst decks, but after matching it up against the other decks, I think this has, by nature as an aggro deck, you can actually win against combo decks, and you can win against aggro decks, and you can win against control decks. So even though it's a bad aggro deck, it's still at least an aggro deck. This list is a spell damage list trying to take advantage of unexpected results, as well as Arcane Explosion and Shooting Star. You play a spell damage plus card, you get off a very value Shooting Star or Arcane Explosion, or you get a value unexpected results off. Unpowered Mauler's horrible weakness is less bad in this deck because there are so many spells. You can probably get it to attack. Pray that you get a turn 1 Mana Worm off, and it has Aluneth for late game. Just a bunch of burn in the face of the Fireball and the Frostbolt and the Flame Geyser and the Cinderstorm. You can make it work. Finally, we're at the number 12 place, which is decks that I think will be able to go about 50-50 at rank 5 and above with really good play.
I won't let you down.
Not much to say here. It's a Quest Priest. Try to complete the quest. By nature of completing the quest, you actually stand a chance against aggro, but against control and combo, the quest is not going to save you. Potential tempo plays here with Reckless Experimenter into Devilsaur Egg, and Reckless Experimenter into Cube. And Zarek's Cloning Gallery can pull out a bunch of stuff. When I look at this deck, it lets me realize, you know, this is about how one would build a Reckless Experimenter deck. I mean, you would build a better Quest Priest than this, but still, it makes me think, okay, I probably shouldn't rate Reckless Experimenter that highly.
Only beasts are above deceit.
24 new cards! The general idea of this deck is to just play mechs on curve, almost no direct damage in this deck other than Bomb Toss, but hopefully the magnetic cards are going to be able to magnetize onto stuff and then hit the face. And then the hero power will hopefully be able to finish people off. It's a very slow going magnetic deck, but it does have some of the better magnetic cards like the Replicating Menace and the War Gear and the Ziliax. And then you can magnetize a bunch of stuff onto Flark's bombs. It's got the Venomizer, it has the Spider Bomb, it has Fireworks tech. Seeing this makes me think that the Mech Hunter deck is not going to be very successful in real constructed, since this just looks like a pile of, you know, reasonable stats, but not really unfair enough to contest the other aggro decks.
I will serve.
I think this deck is looking stronger than that Hunter deck, and even though I value the Hunter hero power as pretty high, I think that this deck is a much better mech implementation. It's got Glowtron early, Crystology is a 2 mana, draw 2 decent cards in your deck. It's got some very solid support cards, Inequality, Hydrologist, Peacekeeper, Consecration Champion, Harem, Tyrion. Those are all good cards. And then the mech cards I just think are slightly better. The class card and Oil Module is alright. It's actually got Imposter in it, which you can curve into War Gear or Ziliax. And then Mechano Egg has a bunch of magnetic cards that it can absorb. I think Kangor's Endless Army. Oh, and then you have the finisher, Kangor's Endless Army itself, which is going to be pretty good in this deck. Though, I think this deck's got a reasonable chance at it, though it's, you know, lacking a bit of power in order to compete with the top tier decks.
Greetings.
General idea here is to play the test subject and to be able to buff it up. Main problem with this deck is the only other thing you can really buff is the Twilight Drake. You can get some pretty sick combos going with 2 Radiant Elementals out and the test subject. Oh no, it doesn't have Topsy-Turvy! But Topsy-Turvy is the way that you could theoretically do super combos. Ah, how unlucky. But yeah, general idea of this deck, get something to stick, play Powered Shield, Extra Arms, Divine Spirit, Inner Fire. It's gonna be rough, but it could work.
Storm, earth, and fire.
This could have been a much stronger deck, but everything up here is a mistake. The Fire Elemental is a Stormbringer and Kalamos, I'd say. And it could use a bit of burn, like Lava Burst, which would also activate Thunderhead. The general idea of this deck is to rush your opponent down. What it's missing is the burn that Lava Burst would have provided. But Thunderhead can be expected to get a good amount of value, as well as Unbound Elemental. The Storm Chaser will always draw Bloodlust, so the idea is to control the board, get a bunch of board, play the Bloodlust, win the game. I feel like in practice, this is not very likely with a deck like this, but at least the idea is there.
Supper!
This is kind of like current control Warlock. It's got the Void Lords, it's got the Possessed Lackey to get the Void Lords. End game is to try to get the Omega Agents on the board as well as Omega Defenders. The main problem I have with this deck is that even though it's excellent at anti-aggro, I actually feel like this deck will be able to beat aggro more often than not. Against Malagos Druid or Shudderwock, Shaman, or any amount of combo decks, this deck is just gonna fold because it has pretty much no aggression to it. And then against control matchups, it's like a slightly worse control deck because it also has no anti-control tools. Excellent deck against aggro though.
For the wild.
This is a deck which has literally put in every single card which has the word TREANT in it. And I think that the end result is decent. It's kind of a token druid deck. Obviously the idea is to get out a bunch of TREANTs, and then get Mulch Muncher discounted, play the discounted Dendrologist, play the Dendrologist with the effect. Buff all your cards with Power of the Wild, or Savage Roar, or Soul of the Forest. Main problem with this is it's lacking any amount of card draw. It's instead chosen the aggressive path, which... sure, we'll see how that goes. This was the highest of the tier 2 decks, and I think it is going to do about 50-50 in that category, but maybe like a slightly above expected. Finally, we have the decks that I think can climb, even though they're less optimal than constructed level decks with proper play.
I greet you.
This particular Zoolock is going to use both the hand buff mechanic with the Soul Infusion and the Doubling Imp and the Serenite Chain Gang, as well as the damage yourself idea with the Nether Soul Buster. It's got the Crystallizer and the Flame Imp and the Cobalt Librarian, which can do that. And then it also has Void Analyst for hand buff as well. It's got a major demon theme as well, putting in the not so great card of Demon Fire, and also the hilarious card of Ectomancy, which summons copies of all the demons you control. Gonna be tough to pull that off in Zoo, but it's there. And then finally Blood Reaver Gul'dan tops it off. So yeah, it's a Zoo deck. It's less good than most Zoo decks will be, but I expect that it can still win over 50% of matches at rank 5+.
For justice.
This deck is actually fairly close to the even Paladin deck right now. It's a little bit heavier than usual. It's got some decent cards. Unfortunately, it has 2 Vicious Scale Kite in it. I guess the lifesteal is there to combo with the Crystal Smith Kingor in order to double your healing, and then you can also find it with Crystology. So kind of a questionable amount of, 2-drop choices here. Oh, there's also the Glass Knight to combo with that. But other than that, it's just got solid cards in it, which I would expect to be able to pull off wins with. And then the hero power of 1 mana, that's just value. Late game, you can Silver Sword, Tyrion, Tarim, Steed. Good value deck, which also gets in some amount of aggression. Questionable picks, but probably not enough to sink the deck too much.
I will crush you.
It's got the solid Taunt Warrior cards. It's got a solid plan. This actually only has 2 cards from Boomsday, both of which are bad for this deck, Super Collider and Ziliax. The Ziliax is really only here to be able to be fetched with Countess Ashmore, probably. And unfortunately, to fit in the Super Collider and Ziliax, I suspect that they had to cut off a really good card in this deck, Town Crier, which would have normally fetched the Rabid Worgen and the Darius Crowley, which is normally why you even run these cards. But no, we have to put in Super Collider and Ziliax. Despite that, I still think that this deck can go above 50-50 at rank 5+. Even though it's a very suboptimal build, I think completing the quest and just getting Die Insect as your hero power is a decent plan, which can be anti-aggro, can be anti-control, and might be able to kill off combo decks fast enough, even though it's a worse implementation.
My magic will tear you apart.
It is very close to the present day Big Spell Mage. Unfortunately, instead of Voodoo Doll, there's Shimmering Tempest. I guess it's still 1 health minion that you can hit with Frostlich Jaina, but the idea is the same. You stall with your big spells, you eventually get the Frostlich Jaina, and Frostlich Jaina carries you to a win. There's also some flavor in Spiteful Summoner, getting some big spell value. Dragon Color Alana is here. A lot of anti-aggro tools. Get to the Frostledge Jaina. Solid game plan. Wait, this one actually has no new cards from Boomsday. I just realized that. Probably for the best, because the big hand cards would have made this deck worse.
Greetings, traveler.
And they have accurately identified that Arcane Shot was the weakest card in Spellhunter and decided to put in Secret Plan instead, which is a fantastic addition. Probably the only questionable thing here is that I feel like the choice of secrets isn't the best that it could be, but it's pretty close. Other than that, this is like genuinely a good deck. And by far the best recipe that you can get with WHIZBANG. There you have it at 5 decks that I think will gain ranks at 5+, at 7 decks that I think will spin about 50-50 at rank 5+, and at 6 decks that I think will lose ranks at rank 5+. It's going to be tough to get WHIZBANG up to Legend, but with enough dedication and with squeezing out the percentages and like really caring about winning, I think you can hit Legend with WHIZBANG, and that'll be wonderful.
The good and the bad times, we've been through them all. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around. The Inspira, Wheezing Seal, Gyarados Slowbro, gotta catch 'em all, gotta catch 'em all.